that point, of course, we cannot forget that Britain spent way beyond its means as well. And while Mervyn King seems to be blaming the Europeans at this stage, you know, they're right in it up to their necks too, aren't they?
I agree with everything Stephen and Tony has said. Europe's been a disaster for the past, well, certainly for the past year. This doesn't come as a surprise. Certainly doesn't come as a surprise to myself and many other commentators. Europe simply spent more than they earn, and you can only spend more than you earn for so long. Greece and Italy and the pigs are obviously the worst offenders, but as you said, England is far from without guilt, and obviously Ireland across the water has been a disaster for the last couple of years, led by its property sector, which was the world's biggest property bubble and saw an 80% fall. So, what's I think most.
Oh, sorry.
Go on, finish your point, Adam, and then we'll have Tony.
Oh, I think one point to note, and Tony might have some comments on this as well, is why all these European banks are holding sovereign debt. Where does this fall within? If I was a shareholder in a bank, I don't want it to be buying debt in Greece and Italy and all these other poorly run countries. That should be a question that isn't being really looked at. Is essentially why Europe's, the ECB and IMF and all these organisations are rushing to to bail out these countries, because the debt's been held by their banks. And if Italy and Greece aren't effectively rescued, then the French and German banks potentially are most likely on the hook. So the question is, why have those banks lent so much money? And there's an answer to it, and due to the way that Basel and other bodies have weighted risk for sovereign lending. That's the real issue here. Why are these banks on the hook for so much to these dodgy countries?
Tony, what were you going to say? And Poor's moves downgrading by one notch in the long-term ratings for our four big banks, and Macquarie Bank went down 2 notches. Is that really on the back of this sort of world uncertainty about risk and banks?
I think I've been talking quite a lot about the Australian banks being far more risky than virtually anybody attests to. I think it's even a bigger concern when Standard & Poor's downgrades you, because they're usually so late to the party, the police have come and shut it down. I think they downgraded Enron the day it went bankrupt, or declared bankruptcy. So the concern of the ratings agency downgrading you isn't the fact that the ratings agency has downgraded you, it's the fact that people as stupid as the rating agency has finally woken up to the problems, because they usually just have absolutely no idea what's going on and take so long to realise. The Australian banking industry, the Australian Big Four banks hold an enormous amount of residential mortgage on their books. CBA's got hundreds of billions of it. And as I've said multiple times, Australian property is the most expensive in the world. So if and when property does fall back to its intrinsic value, the Australian banks have got these huge amounts of assets held in loans to property that's been overvalued.
Yeah, Stephen, were you worried about the markets?
Personally, I don't really care what the market does month to month, day to day, or even year to year. Ultimately, we've had a period of 20 years almost of credit expansion through the US, Europe, and especially here. And it's just time for creative destruction and credit implosion, so to speak. So it's time people cleaning up their personal balance sheets. It's happening in the United States with savings rates up. It's happening in Australia with savings rates up. That then has an effect on companies like retailers and discretionary spend companies. So they're naturally going to have a far lower profit and earnings, and that means they have lower market capitalisation, which draws the market back down. So I'm not concerned by it. I think it's probably, if anything, a good thing. If you're an investor, you'd rather see low share prices than high share prices. You'd rather buy wholesale than retail.
All right.
I can't see the obviously, if I was nearing retirement and had my life savings in shares, I'd be very concerned, obviously. But for other people, it's the same thing with high house prices. How people kick along house prices like a football game, yet you wouldn't be kicking up high bread prices. High prices aren't a good thing. You want prices that are close to intrinsic value. And in the long term, as Benjamin Graham famously said, that the market's it's a weighing machine. In the short term, it's a voting machine. So the market will do its thing eventually. Mr. Market will correct prices, will correct over-exuberance. It's happened in the US, it's happened in Europe, will happen here. It's not something that I think, unfortunately, too many business commentators, business shows focus on what's happened in the market today or yesterday when it's completely irrelevant.
Adam, you want high prices for owners
You want your shares to go up. Of course you want high prices. You want to own Apple. You want to own Apple shares, and you want to suddenly own a company worth 300 billion because you've had a great innovation and you've destroyed a lot of desktop or laptop computer companies. You want that. Of course you don't want high consumer prices, but if you suddenly did have bread prices going up 500%, well, you'd want to own Goodman Fielder, wouldn't you? I mean, we can be consumers and owners at the same time and just hope we're on the right side of each move.
What you want is high cash flows and high profits. What you don't want is necessarily high PE ratios, which is what we've had for the last 20 years. We've had share markets go up due to price earnings multiple expansion, not due to any fundamental improvements in productivity, which has been the concern. Sure, Apple's been a fantastic company, one out of the box, and its share price has gone up and its multiple isn't that high. But ultimately, what I look at as an investor is the long-term value of a company and the present value of its cash flows in the next 20 or 30 years, not what's happened in the last 5 years or what might happen in the next 6 months.
All right. Tony,